Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. First off, season's greetings and all that sort of stuff. Have a happy new year. There'll be more vids coming in 2019, a whole pile of stuff coming. I would say first with this interview, Anthony Joshua talking to DAZN USA. This was clearly a December 15th interview while he was in New York at Madison Square Garden. Wide-ranging interview, 10-minute piece, but they covered a lot of ground. The three things that I'll specifically cover in this video: the talk of Luis Ortiz. Anthony Joshua has talked of Ortiz. He was questioned on that, and he's given some quite interesting answers. But for everyone who says he doesn't want to fight the boogeyman, he doesn't want to mention the boogeyman, Luis Ortiz, well, he just has. Also, he's talked about boxing needs more respect, and that could help lift up the sport. He's talked about losing his O and what that would mean for his career, and he's not worried. But also, in 2019, he's looking at the USA, wants to fight there, says that's a goal of his. A lot to get through, so let's crack into it. Buckle in. Let's go. So Joshua talking to Arkan Barak, and this was clearly on December the 15th, before the Dillian Whyte fight, where he said Whyte was next if Deontay Wilder doesn't sign to fight him. He was asked, well, who is next if it's not Wilder, if it's not Fury? And he said he wants to go down the list, 3, 4 or 5. And they said, well, who is that? And Joshua responded, Ortiz, Miller, Whyte. Any one of those names. And Ark said to him, no one has ever really heard you mention Luis Ortiz's name before. And Joshua's response was, well, you're right, because you know what it is for me. I've always felt like these guys want to fight, but I've always felt like I've brought a lot more to the table. So let's say they want a lot in terms of their reward to fight me, like well above their station. I have never mentioned these guys' names because I already know what they want when they fight me, and I know it's something that I'm not willing to give. And then he went on to say, and I'm paraphrasing this piece, that effectively people should look at him as an opportunity to take the keys to the city, rather than get what I can get out of this guy now. And he previously said he'd taken the low ball, he'd been in that position previously, but had seen the long-term plan of doing that, and then obviously now being in the position that he's in. So I'll jump in here with some quick thoughts before moving on to the next thing. So Luis Ortiz, he was once Anthony Joshua's mandatory. At the same time Kubrat Pulev was the IBF mandatory, Luis Ortiz was the WBA mandatory. And Luis Ortiz, at the time in 2017, he threatened to take Anthony Joshua to court. The WBA didn't really get behind Ortiz, and he was stuck in the queue behind Kubrat Pulev. And ultimately he went on to fight Deontay Wilder, abandoned the WBA and went to the WBC to fight Wilder. An Ortiz and Joshua fight, while Ortiz was at Matchroom, it never happened for whatever reason. Ortiz was left fighting guys like Dave Allen and Malik Scott in Monaco. And subsequently to that, Luis Ortiz finally had his title shot against Wilder, almost beat the guy. And since then, Deontay Wilder's been holding Luis Ortiz up as the guy, the bastion of all heavyweights, saying, this guy is the number 2 heavyweight in the world. This guy, if anyone wants to come fight me, they've got to get through him. Saying to Dillian Whyte, fight Ortiz, I'll give you a fight. And Anthony Joshua has been criticized by a section of fans for not talking about Ortiz, and people are saying that Anthony Joshua is scared of Ortiz. And I just think that's nonsense. I think it's more that, from what Joshua has said, what does Ortiz bring to the table? Clearly he brings a lot of risk, he's a top guy in the division, but beyond that, it's hard to sell a fight with a guy like Luis Ortiz in some respects because he doesn't speak English, he doesn't really have a fan base of sorts. There's a lot of people piling in behind Luis Ortiz at the moment, but most of them are Deontay Wilder fans. Boxing fans more broadly, from my take on it is they rate Ortiz, but it's not like people are going to go out and pay $500 for a Luis Ortiz ticket to go see him blow away a journeyman or whatever. You know what I mean? So Ortiz, he's kind of had this, career where he struggled to get some fights. He's a dangerous guy. He's just a little bit too dangerous for many guys to take on. And he has been looking for these big fights. He's been struggling to get it. And he got his opportunity and he failed to take it against Wilder. He almost took it, but he didn't. But Anthony Joshua, now saying Luis Ortiz's name, and bear in mind this was from December 15th, a couple of weeks ago. it's good to hear him actually call out his name, because that is one of the fights that I think hardcore boxing fans are very interested in. And if you're listening to this channel, you're more likely to be deeper into boxing than the casual fan who, probably doesn't even have any idea who Luis Ortiz is. And that's part of Ortiz's problem. Remember when Luis Ortiz called out Dillian Whyte and said, okay, I will take up your call out, fight me in the UK. And hardcore boxing fans like myself, we piled in behind that saying that's a great fight. But ultimately, they went with where the proven money was going to be, and that was a domestic fight with Derek Chisora. And it left a lot of us a little bit bitter, because a Whyte-Ortiz fight was certainly a better prospect, in my opinion, in terms of a fight that I wanted to see. I'd seen Chisora-Whyte the first time. We knew it was going to be somewhat similar the second, and it was. But I do like to hear Anthony Joshua call out Luis Ortiz, because that fight, if it's going to happen, it's got to happen soon, because Ortiz, he's withering on the vine here. He's 39 years old. But I think realistically, if we look at what I've just been talking about, boxing being a business, who are they going to be selling out more in terms of bums on seats at a Wembley in April 2019? Out of the three guys that Joshua mentioned, Ortiz, Miller and Whyte as being the backups to a Wilder and Fury if they're not available, I think Whyte, then Miller and Ortiz in terms of a commercial sense. None of them are bad fights. But I do believe, in terms of the risk, maybe Luis Ortiz does represent the most risk out of all three guys. Miller will know what he will do. Whyte, he's a known quantity. Joshua's beaten him 3 years ago. I think it would be a similar fight in terms of how it would play out in the stoppage. But Ortiz is a bit of a question mark. Like Alexander Povetkin, Luis Ortiz, very good boxer. He'll be looking to counterpunch Joshua. It could be a very tough fight for Anthony Joshua. But then so too, Jarrell Miller with his unrelenting pressure. That would be tough too. And Dillian Whyte, if he lands a big left hook on Anthony Joshua's chin, he's got a decent shoulder. It's healed from the first time around. Who knows what could happen? They all represent a lot of risk for Anthony Joshua. But they've got to know their station, as Anthony Joshua put it. He says he's not going to be overpaying some of these guys, because once you get past, say, Wilder and Fury, the next sort of 5-6 guys, they are much of a muchness in terms of, where they are in the chasing pack and in terms of their commercial value, the commercial worth. Maybe Dillian Whyte, he's been on pay-per-view now. Maybe he's got a slight head up on some of these other guys in terms of value. But in terms of risk, a lot of these guys bring different things. But certainly there will be some who say, well, he's called out Luis Ortiz with no intention to fight him. And I think he does have an intention to fight him, but, there's a number of other guys he intends to fight too. So there will be some people who say this is a hollow call out, that he doesn't want it. He's just throwing his name out there because he hasn't thrown his name out there and people are giving him crap for it. Over to you what you believe. I think none of these guys are afraid of each other, but they do want to make the most money. And Joshua, he went on to say in the interview that a goal of his is to fight in the USA. He wants to do it in 2019, but he needs to connect with American people more before he does it. And he said he wants to go to Brooklyn, Harlem, Queens, schools, the projects, connect with people, etc. in the grassroots. And I guess, that probably signals that, New York is pretty much the destination when they do decide to fight in the United States. And clearly Jarrell Miller is a guy that they've been looking at as a potential opponent. They've been trying to build him up more recently, connect Joshua's name to Miller. Miller's been on his own promotional tour in the United Kingdom, trying to talk up the prospect of a fight with Joshua, connect more with the UK market in terms of, just name recognition. Because a lot of people don't have any idea who Jarrell Miller is outside of boxing fans. He hasn't been fighting, hardly anyone of note more recently. But I guess the comments about needing to connect with the American people more, that says a lot about Anthony Joshua's profile in the United States, that he realizes it's not where it needs to be. There will be some name recognition, beyond boxing fans, broader sports fans and such. But clearly he knows that it's not at a level where they can make the push to America to have a fight, to do the sort of, business that they want to do and that they're accustomed to doing back home in the United Kingdom. Anthony Joshua was also asked, well, how important is it to keep that unbeaten record, keep that O? And Joshua's response, it was quite a good one. He said, it doesn't matter if I take a loss. It is important to stay unbeaten. But if you take a loss, it shows you are facing the best in the division. Losing does happen at sports. One loss shouldn't define my career. And, for the most part, I wholeheartedly agree with that. And he does actually, if he does lose now, and if he's facing the best, Well, that's just boxing. Most of the top guys in the division over the years, they've taken losses. There is no one who's, been a long reigning champion at heavyweight who hadn't had a loss. Vladimir Klitschko lost multiple times before he had his 10-year-long reign of excellence. So, and Muhammad Ali, he took 5 losses in his career as well. So there's a whole pile of guys that are legends of the sport that do have losses. And that's the challenge for Anthony Joshua. Keep facing the best guys. Try to keep that out, but just keep facing the best opposition. If you lose your out, well, it's not the end of the world. And as he sort of said, well, the rematch would be even bigger to whoever he lost to. And towards the back end of the interview, Anthony Joshua was asked about, well, what's a boxing New Year's resolution that you'd implement if you could? And his response was, well, boxers should respect each other more. And I agree with this in some sense. There is a place for trash talk, but sometimes it is a bit gratuitous. But Joshua said it could be better for the sport if there was more respect and it helped lift it up instead of tearing each other down. And from his perspective, right now, it appeals to the public, especially in the 20 to 30-year-old age group. And that's where boxing is targeted. And he thinks it should be more broad brush, appealing to 10 to 70-year-olds. Try and get a bigger chunk of the market instead of a smaller wedge, which he believes it's 20 to 30-year-olds there. And actually, he's probably drawing on some inside information from, Matchroom and other bits and pieces, the analytics that he's privy to. What did you make of it all? Anthony Joshua mentioning Luis Ortiz doesn't often happen, but bear in mind this interview from DAZN, although it was published on December 28, it was recorded a couple of weeks earlier on December 15th. He's since mentioned Dillian Whyte as the backup if Deontay Wilder says no. And in terms of the other issues, fighting in the USA, is it going to happen in 2019? Also, Anthony Joshua wants more respect in boxing. Would that be a good thing for the sport? Let me know. Drop a comment, loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.